There's been more suggestions on ways to solve the country's energy crisis. The Steel and Engineering Industries Federation of Southern Africa says Eskom must put 4,000 megawatts of energy out for bid. The organization says independent power producers must be allowed to bid. It also says the unbundling of Eskom must be sped up. I'm joined now virtually from Johannesburg by Tafadzwa Chibanguza. He is with the organization and he is the COO. Thanks so much for your time this evening. Quite wide-ranging comments made by you on behalf of your federation, looking at this issue that really has South Africa on its knees. And I hope I'm not being overly dramatic, but it really does seem that that's where we are right now. You do, however, make the point that the problem doesn't begin and end with Eskom, and that the problem should be looked at from a broader perspective, including look at the role of the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy. Tell me what you mean by that.
All right. So what we mean by that, and Marcelle, thank you. Let me start by thanking you for having us, and thank you for having me on. What I mean by that is Eskom have repeatedly mentioned the fact that they're actually an implementer of policy. They don't create policy. So in there, right, then we then step back and say, okay, so what is the wider ecosystem? The wider ecosystem, which we refer to as the electricity supply industry, includes the likes of the DMRE, NERSA, Eskom then, of course, being the implementer. You have municipalities that come into that picture, and the list goes on. Look, I can go on. In fact, in this broader energy supply industry discussion, you can even then bring in aspects of the energy transition, the just energy transition, and the rest. So the idea really is that to say for the electricity supply industry to work in sync, all these policy areas actually need to be working harmoniously. And that's where the piece that we put out is, in essence, says that the problem with electricity is actually one of a policy issue, and what will actually make all these aspects, what will make all these institutions work in harmony, is actually a policy, area, and not so much just an Eskom or an electricity area. Yeah.
Tell me what you're hearing from the members of the Steel and Engineering Industries Federation of Southern Africa. I mean, we hear about how these rolling blackouts affect businesses, from small and medium enterprises, where, for instance, yesterday we heard stories from people who are running hairdressers from home to try and put food on the table. Now, you times that by $1 billion, and I suppose we're talking about the kind of impact it's having on your industry. Can you talk to me about what your members have been experiencing and what their outlook is right now?
Yeah, and so we have the very interesting mix in our members of, and maybe I always set the parameters. So as Steel and Engineering, we're talking about 25% of the manufacturing sector. But it's the real economy where electricity is a fundamental input into the process. So in that 25% of manufacturing, which we call Steel and Engineering, the interesting mix that we have is that we have the upstream primary steel producers who are heavy, intensive electricity users. So any impact to them is massive, purely by the virtue of them being large-scale energy-intensive users. We then also represent the value chain downstream, being your fabricators, your engineering shops. So those, the lower down you go into the downstream, they are less energy-intensive, but the impact is still the same because if electricity is not there, you can't produce. So it's as good as the impact that is felt on the upstream. Granted, it's just the degree of consumption that comes into that. So what we've been hearing from our members is, one, difficult to plan production. You lose, there's reputational damage because you can't supply product. But the other very stressful thing is the fact that the more the outlook is so bleak. The outlook in terms of the electricity industry is so bleak that it affects should you expand shop here in South Africa or look elsewhere. So the implications are wide, wider than just now. They're wider, they're wide into the future in terms of the investment prospects of the sector, and and so that's generally what we're hearing. And Marcelle, I think another important point that that is inherent in the electricity supply industry is that so the one side is the supply side, which we know there is shortages of supply, but then there's also the price. We've seen excessive electricity tariff increases. Again, if you are sitting with a new project, a mill or a factory that you're thinking to expand, and your investment committee asks you what will electricity be in 10 years, you actually can't give them a number. So it's those two aspects that are really affecting, but it does have really devastating implications for our members and the prospect for the sector.
And made so much more difficult because this is an industry that operates internationally as well. So that must make it even more difficult for them. Talk to me now, though, about your master plan. You spoke recently at the Mainstreaming the Steel Master Plan conference quite recently. Yes. One would think then, when you're talking about not being able to plan for the future, that South Africa's problem with the production of consistent and dependable energy, it would make it very difficult to come up with a master plan. How has the current crisis informed that master plan that you are expected to present to stakeholders in your industry?
Very, 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 very good point that you brought up, Marcelle. And we actually closed off our conference today where we were discussing this master plan. So the master plan is very cleverly structured in that, and I must just make the point that it's not a Seifsa master plan, it's an industry partnership housed in the DTIC, who are the custodian of most of the industry master plans. We then are a signatory to that master plan, supporting the master plan. But where I was going with the point where it was very cleverly structured is that the master plan identifies that there are burning platform issues that threaten the very sustainability and viability of the industry now. Those burning platform issues, amongst the host of them, include also the electricity supply. So it then determines there are what we call demand side issues, and then there's supply side issues. On the supply side issues are aspects of supply of electricity, I mean. And supply of electricity has actually been identified as a threat to any prospect of us growing the sector if we're ever going to ever going to aspire for that outcome. So electricity, and which is what ties into the piece that we put out, is that we now need to, at this point, we all agree there's a shortage of supply. What now is needed is for greater in private sector participation in the provision of electricity, because the market is there. That 4,000 to 6,000 megawatt shortfall that Eskom always talks about is actually a ready market. The capital is not the issue to invest in that energy, because the energy is there. The capital is there to invest in the energy. So the idea really is that there's a lot more that hinges on this master plan becoming successful, and that's where the energy element comes in. And it's actually something that we need to resolve as a prerequisite, as a burning platform issue for that master plan to be successful. And then in the master plan then has what we call growth measures. And the idea is then that once we save the current capacity, which entails also saving the current capacity because of the electricity, or resolving the electricity issue, and then only after that can we even consider aspirations of growing the industry.
Just very quickly before I let you go, now Minister Gwede Mantashe recently announced bid window 6 being opened for the provision of 2,600 megawatts. You're saying, however, that they should speed up that whole process and announce as soon as possible bid window 7 to get that shortfall sorted out of 4,000 megawatts. Is that what you're saying?
Very correct. That's what we are saying. But in essence, we even go a step further to say if we all agree that we are in an electricity crisis, why not just put the entire bid window why not put the entire shortfall on a bid window? There's this artificial cap that we've tended to place on how much electricity we bring on. I'll give you a practical example. Under bid window 5, they were looking for 2,500 megawatts, but the bids came in at about 9,000 megawatts. So again, it goes to this point that the capacity, the appetite is there. So why then place this artificial cap when private sector investment is actually ready to deploy that? So in essence, what we are actually saying is instead of capping it to 2,600 megawatts, just put the entire bid window put the entire shortfall under a bid window, and then we begin to resolve. We start to try to resolve issues from there.
Interesting take there for us to leave it on. Thank you so much for your time this evening. That was Tafadzwa Chibanguza. He is the COO of the Steel and Engineering Industries Federation of Southern Africa. We thank him for his time this evening.